Hello and welcome on in, everybody. Good to see you. Welcome on into another Photoshop challenge. My name's Sam Peterson. I'm your host for today, and we're going to be doing a challenge called Anything Glows, where basically we can turn any object into a glowing object, showing you some techniques around that. And if you want to join this challenge, you should be able to check the description down below. It should have a link and a file for you, so you can follow along with exactly what I'm doing. So let's jump into Photoshop. I'll show you what we're working with. This is the starter file where you can follow along. This is the image I'm using. Feel free to use any image that you want to, of course. But this is kind of the effect that we're going for today. So we're going to be creating a glowing object and having it cast a light and all that good stuff. So I'm going to get rid of this and we're going to jump right into it. But before we do, of course, I want to say hey to everyone. What's going on, General Kenobi? Good to see you. Sean, our moderator, Wade. What's up, Wade? Frank, of course. I think Frank was the first one in here. What's up, Steve? Carol. Good to see everyone. So we're going to get right into this. And what we're going to do first off is we have this background. So we're going to duplicate this with Control or Command J. And from here, what I want to do is I want to use this as our deer layer. I'm going to separate the deer from the background. So I'm going to grab a tool like my quick selection tool up here in the top left. And I'm going to do select subject. All right. From here, I can add or subtract to this selection with the quick selection tool. You can hold on Alt or Option to select, or sorry, subtract. And you can hold on Shift to add to it. I might, clean up the horns around here. Hold on Alt or Option just to grab the space between the ear. I see that this horn right here is not quite selected, so I'm going to hold on Shift and select that. Add to it a little bit. I also noticed that this part of the horn is not selected, so I'm holding on Shift to add to that. And you can spend as long as you need to. I'll probably do this a little bit quick. Now, some areas might give you trouble. Like if I try to add to this area, I actually got that pretty good. Sometimes you'll notice that the contrast between the background isn't quite what you need, and sometimes quick selection might have an issue. If that's the case, I just use the lasso tool and do it manually. But I try to do everything I can with the quick selection tool, or whatever selection tool seems good for the scenario that I'm using. And if it doesn't grab it, because you can see this blurred line, there's so little contrast, it's hard for it to understand where that is. But you can always do this manually. Just clean up here. Another thing I sometimes will do is I could use the magic wand tool. You can actually Shift W to scroll between those different selection tools. But I might just try to grab these areas of the background. It works best if it's a flat tone like this space between the horns is pretty clear for it to identify. Also, if you have contiguous checked on, it'll just grab that space that's closed off. But if you have it checked off, it'll add or subtract from that selection to any tone that it sees. So that can sometimes be dangerous if you're subtracting the sky tone and there's a tone like that in the deer. That can create an issue, but it can help save time if there's lots of little spots. So that looks okay. Grab my lasso tool, just clean up the horn. Mostly what I'm concerned about is the horn here. We can always go back and play with these masks later, but I think that's looking pretty good. So what I want to do here is I might even go into select and mask. So like that. And one thing I want to kind of keep in mind is I have this refine edge brush tool right here on the top left. Now these deer on the left are out of focus, and this is going to create a little bit of an issue. There's some areas of focus. What we could do is we could try to just kind of run it along the outside here. See if we can kind of soften up that edge. I'm not even so much concerned with the main deer that's our focal point, but I think one effect that can kind of look a little weird is if we're applying effects to these deer that are out of focus, but they have like really sharp edges for the effects we're applying. So I might just do this really quick and messy. We can always go back and clean these up later, but I just want to soften these edges up. I just don't want them too sharp for now. They are going to be kind of messy because this can be a tricky brush to use with something that's out of focus. but I mostly am concerned with the edges that are going to be facing the light cast from the horns. All right, so the antlers are going to be casting a light, so you can imagine any surface that's facing that light source is going to be the one that is most notable to be like overly sharp. So again, just doing this kind of quick and messy. Might even get his little back here. So that's why I'm doing all the sides facing the light. Maybe this one right here. Okay, so I'm going to click OK. We have our selection here, and I'm going to mask that out. Now you can't see it, but we have this on a new layer masked out. I think that looks pretty good there. Let's see here. I'm going to make a quick layer between the two just to show you an example, but you can kind of see how this is working and how well it worked or how rough it's looking. But what you can always do after the fact is go in with a soft brush. And I'm using a soft brush because this is out of focus. And if you want to clean up the edges, you can do that. You can just kind of go in. And it's black to conceal. And we can switch to white to reveal. So this is something you could spend quite a long time on. We're going to move past this, but this is something I would kind of give a little extra time to, or even at the end go around and just kind of clean up when I see what's looking right and what's not. But if you've masked it already and you notice something after the fact, like, oh, this has a little spot out of it, you can go in and clean it up after the fact. So that is the big benefit of masks and non-destructive workflows. But I think that's pretty good. So I'm going to delete this black layer. That was just to give us some visibility between the two layers to see how it actually looks. From here, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and set the background to being darker. So I'm going to do a few color lookup adjustment layers. So I'm going to go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Color Lookup. And for this one, I'm going to do Horror Blue. You can always scroll through these. I'm using the arrow keys to toggle through them to kind of see what you like, how it looks. But I'm going to pick Horror Blue because I know I want that one. And this is just me trying to turn it into a night scene, essentially. I'm going to toggle off the visibility of our deer layer just so I can see everything a bit more clearly. And this might be a bit strong for me, so I could take the opacity down to, I don't know, maybe like 60 or so. Just toggle it down a little bit. I'm going to do another color lookup adjustment layer. For this one, we're going to go ahead and do Moonlight. It's going to darken it down a lot, kind of give it a night scene. I want to have a little bit more control over these, so I'm going to add one more adjustment layer, and that's going to be a hue and saturation adjustment layer. In this one, I can just toggle down the saturation. It's a bit too much for me, so maybe like around -40, and the hue I can always change that too. But I think I'll actually leave that alone. I like this kind of blue tone. Could even make it a little bit more blue, +3 or so. And you could even make it more dark. So I might go like -14. So you can kind of see the effect that makes. Just a little bit more control. Not necessary, but just depends what you're going for and what you want it to look like. So from here, I want to double click my background layer. I just want to group this background. So I'm going to shift select all of it, do Control or Command G, which is group, and just name this background, BG for background. Now we got our deer layer here. I want to Control or Command J to duplicate that. And I want to apply the layer mask here. So I'm actually going to right click and do apply layer mask for that deer layer. I can hide the original. Now we just have this one here. Let's see. So I'll take this kind of deer layer that we have, and I want to get just the horns from this. So I'm going to select this with the lasso tool. And I'm going to hold on Shift to add to my selection. I'm just going to try to select around the ear here. But then I'm going to go into the head a little bit. I'm going to go past the base of the horns just a bit. And then we can mask it and clean it up. So now that I look through, I feel like we have a fairly clean horn selection. I want to invert that, Control Shift I, invert that selection, and I'm just going to delete the rest. So that is our little horn selection. Now from here, I can create a little masking layer, a layer mask, I should say. At the bottom of the layers panel, you can click that, and I can use a soft round brush. I gotta click in the layer mask, make sure I have that selected, select black to conceal, and I'm just gonna soften the transition there. So I'm gonna paint in between the horns, and I'm gonna make it kind of bigger to get a more gradual transition, and just paint out the base right there. So the glowing part is just gonna have like this soft fade rather than looking too overt. Umacorn, good to see you. What's going on, Umacorn? Marsha, hello, hello. Anki, good to see you. Welcome on in, everybody. Let's see, I'm just gonna check real quick, make sure we didn't get any questions. Bianito, good to see you. All right, we'll go back. So we got the horns here, and let's see. I think what we want to do real quick before we move into the horns is let's take the deer layer that we got here and actually take the 3 adjustment layers we added to the background. I'm shift selecting them and do Control or Command J to duplicate those all. And then I'm going to right click all of them, or I'm going to move them up above our deer layer. And I should really name these things. So deer, the one we just made at the very top would be horns. Once you get too many layers, I'm always a big advocate for naming and grouping your layers. So I'm going to grab all those duplicated adjustment layers, right click and do create clipping masks, so we clip them to the deer layer. That way the deer has the same effect applied to it as the background, but it's still separated. So what I want to do here is I'm going to group the deer layer too. Why not? Select all of them, Control or Command G, deer. And then now we got that a little bit more sorted, and we can collapse those. So let's see here. So the next thing, we duplicated those, we grouped the layers, and I want to actually duplicate the deer group. So Control or Command J to duplicate the deer group there, and then I'm going to merge the group here. So we got this deer merged copy too. So we should have a deer group by the end of it with the adjustment layers, and then a merged copy of that. So we'll leave that as deer copy. That's fine. So from here, what I want to do is I want to start working on the horns layer. We're going to create the glow with this series of effects, and this is pretty straightforward, pretty simple. But I'm going to take the horns layer and I'm going to do Control or Command J to duplicate it. And I'm going to right click that and do create smart object. Sorry, convert to smart object. We're going to set this blending mode here to linear dodge, which gives it a bit more of a glow effect. You can see how that changes it. So that's at linear dodge. I'm going to duplicate this again. And now I'm going to go into filter, blur, Gaussian blur. And for this first one, we're going to do this a few times. I'm just going to have a small blur. So you can always see how clicking the preview on and off, you can see how that looks. And I think that's pretty good. 80 is what I'm going to go for the first one. And now I'm just going to duplicate this again, Control or Command J, double click the Smart Filter Gaussian blur here. It'll pop right up. And I'm going to change this to a bigger size. We might do something like 200, gives us a bit of a bigger glow. Control or Command J, duplicate that again. Double click the Gaussian blur and change the 200 to 400 or maybe like 450. Click OK. And then now we have this series of glows that are a little bit bigger. They're all on linear dodge, so they kind of have this glow effect against the background. But that is the effect that we're left with here. Now I could try pushing this a little bit further. With our first copy, not the original horns layer, but the first copy, we could go into the layer styles. So we can double click that and go into outer glow. Let me see if I can show you kind of the effect this has there. It's just a little bit more. It's not really necessary, but it just pushes the glow a bit more. And my settings for this are vivid light. The opacity is at 40%. That's really just how intense you want this. But I think it looks pretty good at 40. And then the color you can do straight white. I do have um, this kind of bright yellow, which is a little, is very close to white, but it's kind of the same effect. Um, Spread is at 0, size is at 50. You can mess with the size here a bit, but I like this effect being kind of a bit of a tighter glow. So we're going not too wide here. And the range is 50. We'll leave this the same down here. So click OK. And from here, I have a lot of horn layers, so I'm just gonna group all of these. Again, we're grouping this. This is like 5 layers here that you should have. So shift click that. The original horns, the duplicate with the linear dodge, and then all the copied blurred ones. There's 3 blurred ones. Group that, and we'll do horns. Call that group horns. And of course, save if you haven't. It's always good to get into the muscle memory of Controller Command S. Good to see everybody. I think I see a few new faces popping in. Katarina, what's going on? Clarissa, welcome on in, everybody. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Wait a minute, is this from Harry Potter? I do enjoy my glow effects, magic effects, and all that. So you've definitely probably seen some sort of glowy stuff from me from before. Actually, the last challenge we did was the ghost one, and that was kind of a glowy effect to some degree. All right, so we got our horns layer grouped. This has all of them packaged into one group, but I want to further adjust the whole group just a little bit. So I'm going to go into Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Hue and Saturation. Now this is going to give you a lot of flexibility on what color your glow is. So I'm going to right click that, do Create Clipping Mask, clip the adjustment layer to the group, and from here I can do Colorize, check that box, Colorize, and I'm going to pump the saturation up a lot more, maybe to like 80 or something. And you can use this to create any color glow. So like this would be kind of a cool color glow if they were in a snowy environment. It would almost look like some sort of ice magic, but we're going with this kind of warm glow. So I might do somewhere around 30 for the hue, 80 for the saturation, and we're leaving the lightness alone. So you can see it's not a huge difference because our glow is already kind of orange, but it gives you a lot of flexibility, and I think it's a bit of a nice look. What I could also do, and this is a minor one, this is pretty optional, but I'm going to go into Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Levels. And again, I'm just affecting the overall group a little bit more. I'm going to right click that, Create Clipping Mask. And I could use this bottom slider to negate the darks, and you can also use it to negate the lights. But for this one, if I just think that the dark tones in the horns are a bit too dark for a glowing object, I could always just push that brighter. Like if you go really bright, you get this kind of white glow, which that looks pretty cool, but it's not quite the effect that I'm going for. So I may just pump this up to like 50. The output levels right there, you can see 50, just to ease off the dark tones a little bit for more of a glowy look. Neon glowy is make it glow, same as make it pop. Slight difference, very important distinction. And I think that's pretty good. So what do we want to do next? I think we want to actually paint in some light hitting the deer so they don't just look like they're completely in dark next to this really, really bright glowing thing. So let's see. For our original deer layer, luckily we have that in a deer group, so we know where it is. If I hide our deer layer, our deer copy layer, the merged one, I should just call this deer merged. If I hide that, I can now go into our original deer layer and take off the adjustment layers we used. We already got those for the merged one. We can take all these off and we can toggle back on our deer merged. So what we do from here, let's see, is we just create a layer mask. So down at the bottom, little rectangular button of the layers panel, do add layer mask. And now we can paint out the darkened deer with black. Now you can use a soft round brush, just use the default airbrush soft round brush in Photoshop. If you're using a mouse, take the flow down pretty low. You can take it down to like 30 or 20, but you can just click and kind of cast light on the areas you want. You could even use something like the lasso tool or whatever your favorite selection tool is to kind of sort of mask off these areas if I just want to affect this deer, because the light would be hitting the right side of its neck. but I don't want to affect the body of this, so I might just use a selection like that. So you can go through and you'd probably want to soften up your selection. You can always do select. If you have a selection, you can play around with this, do modify, feather. But what I might do is just use, since I have my tablet, I'll do this really quick since we don't have too much time. But what I want to do is just cast light onto the surrounding deer and just the areas that I think it would be hitting. Now, one thing to keep in mind is a glow like this, I don't think would be too powerful. I think it's easy to kind of get carried away and have everything super bright, but I only want the things right next to it to be really noticeably affected. Might get it on the top of his head too, like his snout, the neck, top of the body. But these deer behind him, I don't think that looks good, so I'm actually just gonna mask them out. And this is something that you could spend a long time on because the selections between the two do require a bit of nuance for like making the edge look correct. You don't want it to look too soft or too hard. And this can be a tricky image because it is out of focus. It's not like a super high res image. It does have a lot of soft edges. So always kind of take into consideration the edges of the original when doing this. Let me see here. Just want to make sure I'm on the right. Yeah, okay. The right step. So I'll add a little bit more. And I think it's good to zoom out and kind of see what this looks like overall. Get that little deer's face more in, maybe a little bit on his back. And I'm using just a soft brush without any like hard edge selections. So I'm just kind of going for it here. But if you ever overdo it, you can always ease off of it by selecting white, kind of going back over the effect. So it's not a bad look there. Now you can see why I didn't spend too much time on the masking of the legs because the light effect is not going to reach the legs. So if the leg mask is really rough, it doesn't really affect this particular image. Should there be some glow on the ground? Yeah, you can absolutely add some glow on the ground. If you want to do that, I would recommend using a color dodge layer or a linear dodge. I can select my background group and I'll just do glow. We'll try color dodge. Color dodge is really powerful. Usually I'd pick a dark color with like a warm, whatever the color of your glow is. If that's not saturated enough, we could always try saturating it more. You could go a lot brighter. So you can kind of paint in a glow on the ground if you want. Let me see. There's one thing I want to do really quick before, and this is because currently by masking out this image, we're only using the lighting of the original. But if you have like a blue glow, you need to change the color of the deer, right? So we can go in the original deer group where we toggled off all those adjustment layers, but add a new adjustment layer for hue and saturation. And from here, I'm going to click colorize as well. I'm going to crank up the saturation a bit, maybe around like 50. And then I can choose my color. So if you had a green glow, you can just make it green, blue glow, all that. But we're just going to make it around 30. So it's kind of the same color. It's not a huge difference, but you have more control over the color there. And I think that helps a lot. And before we get into cleanup, I do have one more thing I think we can add to this. And that is, let me see here. I think we had it. Yeah, so this is an Adobe stock that is not included with the starter file, but it is, if you go to stock.adobe.com and type in the top, you can just type the number. It's 480-666-230. And that is this kind of dust one. You might be able to find a better one, honestly. Some of these big particles I'm not a fan of, but I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste it into here. And I'm going to zoom out because it's a big image. So I'm going to scale it down. Press enter to confirm that. What I could even do is Control or Command U And I could change this to the color of the glow. So I might do colorize, pump that saturation up. And again, if you have like a blue light, you can change it to blue. But I have this warm orange light, so I might give it, it's kind of light glow. You can go as subtle or as you want in the saturation. I just want a little bit of a orange tint. And I'm going to change the blending mode to screen. So this is the last thing we have time for, but I'm going to scale it down. I'm going to create a layer mask, and I'm just going to mask out the edges, maybe any big particles that I don't like. I could always reposition this a little bit, but you can kind of get this like dusty, illuminated effect around the horns. Ease it off as much as you want. It can be subtle or overt depending on what you want, but it's just kind of like the glow is illuminating any sort of particles in the area. So that's all we have time for. This is the point where you can go in and you can clean up that original mask because the edges are going to be more apparent if they're working or not with all the effects in place. But hopefully this gives you some nice techniques to work with. I'll see you all in the Discord. Definitely check it out. This is where we post all the images and you get feedback. You can give feedback. I'm mentoring this, so I'll be here all week responding to all your challenges. You guys have been doing great with this. Thanks so much for stopping by, and I'll see you all next time.